And we are live. Thank you everyone for joining today. If you're in here already, we're just gonna wait a couple more minutes and give some other folks some time to trickle in, but we'll get started in just a few minutes here.
For those of you who are just coming on, we are going to start the webinar in just a few minutes. Just seeing a few more people trickle on, so just wait a few more minutes. James and I were just discussing the Big 12 standings and how you guys are number 2 in the conference.
Yep. Yeah, it'll be next couple of games will be interesting, since Iowa State seems to be kind of an upsetter of a team, and then of course, I think the game after that should be the Red River Shootout. So it'll be us in Texas right before we switch to SEC. It's going to be definitely it's going to have a lot of attention on it. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Honestly, I don't know. I think OU football is always perennially good. We like to forget about last year, but that's the exception that kind of proves the rule.
Hey, I grew up as an Ohio State fan. My dad went to Ohio State. I actually went to Miami of Ohio, but if you grew up in Ohio, you're an Ohio State football fan, and it doesn't matter. You know it doesn't really matter how you're doing. It's just football season, and you're in for it.
Yeah, that is for sure. And you can really feel it, especially whenever the team isn't, I suppose, has a down weekend or something like that. Like the atmosphere around here just kind of deflates. It is really exciting though whenever things are going really well, and we either hit the playoffs or we're in a major bowl game or in a championship or something like that. Everything kind of comes alive. So
I've been to many games in the shoe. I know that energy very well. It's a palpable energy. I was actually working at the University of Alabama when they won a national championship. I was there on a job the day they won their national championship.
Oh goodness!
And the whole town, it was like watching a riot. The whole town. I mean, it was insane. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's only been a few times I've seen something that crazy. That it was being in Alabama when they won the national championship, and then being in Vancouver when they won the Stanley Cup. So I got to be there for both of those. That was crazy.
I mean, that one is definitely legendary as far as Vancouver.
I know. And in neither case was I there for it. Like I just happened to be there, like magically circumstances, and just happened to watch this whole thing unfold. And it was pretty crazy.
That is one of the interesting things about, so the way that campus is laid out, on game days, either for football or basketball, both of those stadiums are on the same road. And that's also where Research Campus is. It's actually directly across the street from Lloyd Noble Stadium, where the basketball team is. And so, yeah, if we have an incident or something that's going on there and we have to get to our data center, that's always kind of interesting, trying to navigate that traffic.
That seems like poor planning.
It was easier whenever I lived right by campus, because then I could just walk. But yeah, I moved a little bit out of town, so it's a little bit. You have to get creative with how you make your way into town.
Alrighty, I believe we're ready to go live. It's 5 minutes after the hour. But again, thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you, James, for making time for us. And of course, thank you, Adam. But this will be our migraine-free SIEM migration with the University of Oklahoma and Devo. So first of all, I'm Shannon D'Arcangelo. I'm on the customer marketing team. I'm a customer marketing associate, and I'm here to just kind of introduce and run the webinar for Adam and James. Adam is the manager of our technical marketing team. And then of course we have James, who very kindly gave his time, the security analyst over at University of Oklahoma. But before we begin, and I pass it over to James and Adam, I'm just gonna run through a quick agenda of what we're gonna go through today. So we're just gonna start with an overview of the Devo migration process, and then we will of course pass it over so there can be some open discussion with James. And like I said, this is just meant to be a very live discussion. We won't have much slide work for you guys because Adam and James will kind of just be talking about the migration process freely. And then of course, any questions that you have, feel free to even drop them in the chat as we go through the webinar. Don't feel like you have to wait until the end to put them in, because if it's very relevant to what we're talking about at each portion, we can get those questions looped in as we go. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Adam. And I would just like to note for the audience to make sure that you maximize the screen so you can get the full discussion view with Adam and James.
Yeah, so you're not looking at the full screen size, isn't the Devo, because most of this is just going to be James and I talking. So you can go over to the window on your right and click the button. It'll move our faces over full screen if that's what you want. I didn't have my stylus stick come in today, so maybe you do want to keep my head small. So today's going to be a little different than what we normally do. You know, a lot of these webinars are around product features or use cases. But Shane and I were talking, and we thought we'd try something a little different. We think that a lot of the resistance that we get from customers that are looking to move to Devo is that the migration is going to be very difficult. And everybody seems to be afraid of the migration. And I think that's true whether you're migrating to Devo or whether you're migrating to something else. I think everybody is a little afraid of migration, just like moving day. My wife and I recently moved from Nashville to Knoxville. We were really looking forward to moving into that new house in Knoxville, really looking forward to starting that next chapter, but we were dreading moving. And it was painful. It was every bit as painful as we were afraid of. And so I think what we wanted to talk about was, how can you minimize and mitigate some of the risks and pain of migration? And how do you make sure that it's worth it? How do you make sure that it goes as smoothly as possible? You plan as well as possible. You get through that pain and you come out on the other side better than you were before you went in. And the best person to talk about that is someone who has gone through that recently. And our friend James from University of Oklahoma was good enough to join us. So what we wanted to talk about today was kind of James's migration story, some of the things that he went through, some of the prep that he did, and just the lessons learned there. I think that'd be beneficial to anyone who's thinking about migrating from one SIM platform to another SIM platform, regardless of what you're coming from and regardless of what you're going to. So James, thanks for joining us. I know Shannon introduced you a little bit on the beginning of the call, but just, could you add a little bit more color about what you do for the university, what you were kind of using before, and kind of what led up to this migration journey of yours?
Sure. Yeah. First, thank you so much for having me. I always love to be able to kind of talk about what I do and also our journey through it, because I think it kind of, as you bring up, it's an intimidating process. It's a very large process, and there's a lot of moving pieces. So anything that I can do to kind of help alleviate people's concerns, because definitely. So first, I'll go ahead and say my name is James Cassidy. I'm an intermediate security analyst with University of Oklahoma's IT Security Operations Division. I've been working for OU since 2015. And originally, whenever I came on as a sysadmin. Primarily, my experience has kind of been from that perspective. Originally, whenever I came on in IT, it was web development. And then from there, it just kind of progressed along as I continued working for bigger companies and getting more into enterprise systems management. Because my experience was a lot more in systems administration, whenever I got brought on to the team, that was kind of where my expertise was being utilized, was in a lot of this management for what was our log management system and our kind of a pseudo SIEM at the time.
So you were running that in-house on-prem, right, on your own hardware, and you were, you know, as a sysadmin role, you were probably responsible for at least some of that infrastructure, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So everything from kind of the physical layer, all networking as well. I feel like we're very privileged where the way that our IT setup was at the time, because we did have and we still do have a very talented crew, we were given a longer leash to be able to kind of manage a lot of our own systems and be able to set things up as we wanted to. So kind of as a result, we were allowed to experiment a little bit more with how we were handling centralized log management. And that was originally kind of where the product, or where that project was born, was from our IT security division. I should back up and say, so whenever I talk about OU IT security today, we're running in a lot more of a holistic enterprise-wide perspective. Whenever I was first brought onto the team in 2017, we were campus-centric. And this will lead into a little bit of like why we needed to migrate to a cloud-based SIEM, because from this campus-centric model, it was essentially up to each campus to be able to create their own silo for log management and SIEM. And so kind of as a result, each campus had its own maturity. Norman campus, of course, that's where the vast majority of our graduate and undergraduate programs are. We also have our Health Science Center campus in Oklahoma City. That's where a lot of our med programs are. And then we also have a satellite campus in Tulsa. And that's where I think it's some medicine and also telecommunications, kind of more IT-focused programs there. So because each campus had its own set of kind of population, each campus has its own resources and its own needs. So that's kind of why, as a result, we just had a huge population of students and folks either in academia or in research. So we had a need for that kind of visibility that centralized log management provides. And we also, with the volume of security incidents that we were having, something like a SIEM was allowing us to be able to organize our information together in a little bit of a better way.
So just a few clarification points on that, so I make sure everybody understands. You know, each campus, you know, each location had their own centralized logs, not really centralized. They had their own localized log management solution. So you'd have ingest coming from different sources in that particular campus, right? So you'd have all the ingest going to a data store on that campus. And then if you wanted to search, you had to search that log store locally, right? There's no federated search or global search across. You'd have to, you know, if you were like tracking a thread across campuses, multiple campuses, you'd have to, you know, search location campus 1, search campus 2, search campus 3, right?
Yeah, and kind of as a result, because of that siloing, that cross-campus search capability, I mean, you're completely right, it wasn't there. And so a lot of our investigations as a result were kind of siloed to that campus, and communicating between the teams, it was happening, but it definitely is not from the state of kind of where we currently are, So in about 2019, that's whenever we started the transition away from the campus-centric model for OUIT to a enterprise-wide model. And so kind of as a result, because each campus had its own maturity level whenever it came to log management and SIEM deployment, there was a need for something that was going to provide an even advanced capability across the board. as well as something that would be as easy to access from each campus as kind of the products that we're currently utilizing. So as a result of kind of seeing these requirements, the SIEM that we were utilizing at the time, and the reason that I call it pseudo SIEM is because we were using Graylog Community Edition. And I think Graylog is fantastic, and we actually still utilize Graylog on-prem today. The Community Edition provides a lot of the base level capabilities. So indexing and parsing kind of organizes, or at least orchestrates, a lot of that configuration across your Elasticsearch or OpenSearch nodes as it is now. So, so that is essentially kind of that was our base capability set, and there was a Graylog deployment that was in HSC, the Oklahoma City campus, and that deployment was taking feeds from Tulsa. We also have, so I kind of consider it like a digital fourth campus. That's our kind of data center fabric. It's we call it shared services, or it's kind of it's basically our now that we're a centralized system, this is where our centralized enterprise applications live. And so pretty much moving beyond that those campus-centric Graylog sections, we needed to figure out a way to be able to get both of those into that single place, so that we are able to start doing the cross-campus searches. And my answer for that was a cloud-based SIEM. Not only does it kind of separate yourself away from being able to be locked into that campus-centric model, now all of your communications with the SIEM are basically going to be pointing towards the same cloud gateway. As well as one of the nice things about a cloud-based SIEM is that you're getting the elasticity from a cloud-native solution. So a lot of the advanced analytics that we were wanting, that is something that wasn't going to be possible or really affordable for us to run on-prem, because for the amount of data that we collect, we would want to be able to support, at least 95% of that workload, and that 95% mark is still going to be huge. So pretty much on-prem from a computation perspective wasn't going to make sense. Storage possibly.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to run. I just noticed that you haven't mentioned anything about the lack of having to administer, I don't know how many, 4 or 5 different ingest collectors, parsers, log servers, databases, clusters.
Yeah.
Right? Weren't you the guy that did? You were like, I think typically in most security organizations, the security team is not responsible for administering the hardware, right? But you actually had to run all that and administer it and patch all that and all that. So I would think that would have been a factor as well. But I noticed that you didn't mention that.
Well, yeah. So I definitely am biased. Okay. That's the part that I love. I think mostly just because I'm so familiar with it. I am a highly technical person. Okay. It's something where whenever it comes to outreach, I like to keep the human element in IT because especially as a security analyst, a lot of the threats that we're dealing with are abusing that human factor. And so kind of as a result, to try and build a better security culture within OU and to be able to do these things, I like trying to be able to participate in the outreach. But whenever it comes to day-to-day, oh my God, there is something about sitting in the machine room and just being able to walk up and down, and it's loud and it doesn't.
I was going to say, I like the air conditioning, but the noise it drives me. It just after a couple hours in there, I'm just ready to rip my hair out. So were you one of the type of guys, James, that got a little nervous inside, where you're like, oh, I can't walk down to the data center and reboot the machine. When it's up in the cloud, I can't put my hands on it. Were you one of those people? You're like, I'm a little nervous about this, that I can't go down and put my hands on the box.
Well, so it's kind of, here's the rub. If anybody is familiar with trying to run an elk stack, or if you're doing Greylog, because like elk, I'll always bring up because so we did full elk for a while. We were at 50 Elasticsearch and 30 Logstash nodes. We were, and I mean, we were using Ubuntu Mass, which I think they've rebranded. Canonical is like rebranded. It is, Mass stands for Metal as a Service. So that was their all-in-one Pixie deployment kind of thing. That was what kept me sane, because trying to, and that's not even dealing with application level configuration, because like Logstash is still using flat files. So you have to somehow push even configurations across all of your nodes. And I was wanting to utilize version control. And if you're familiar with trying to manage analysts, especially if they don't come from a development background, they probably have never used Git before. They don't know what feature branch workflow is. Like basically, my point is, if you love doing this, then it's going to be fantastic if you want to run your own on-prem and things like that. Even loving this and like this is my passion, it is very frustrating to get it right, and it's very difficult to get right as well, because you're constantly trying to fight a moving target of basically being able to balance your ingest and your analysis needs with the resources that you have available. If you work in higher ed, not a whole lot of resources available. So
yeah, and I think you called it. It's the elasticity of it too, right? You know, higher ed's a very unique thing in that people aren't in higher ed, they don't understand. I've worked in higher ed like you. My background, I started in the computer labs at Miami University. That was my first IT job ever at 19. You know, working we had a VAX, a Unix system, a VAX at the time, and then you know, basically worked the terminals that were the front ends to the VAX. And in higher ed, there's this enormous rush, right, for resources, you know, depending if you're semester based or quarterly based, right? You have this huge student registration rush. You know, you have a huge amount of, I don't know what it is, like 90% of your workload, or, you know, comes in that student registration. And then you have another big push, you know, typically at finals week. And so it's really cyclical. It's not like a steady state business. So trying to provision resources and accommodate those massive spikes, and that's what they are. They're just these huge spikes in resources and load. That's almost tailor-made for an elastic kind of SaaS type of model. That's another challenge I think a lot of people that don't have experience in higher ed may not be familiar with.
Yeah.
So okay, you've made this decision to go with SaaS. You know you want centralized search because it's just too time consuming searching everywhere else. So, you know, did you get any pushback from anybody like, hey, better the devil you know, we've had this thing forever, let's just live with it, we've invested in it? Was there like that resistance of, you know, I'd rather live with the nightmare that I know than face this, you know, potential risks that I don't know?
Yes. Yeah. So there was definitely the process that I went through. So being a public university, especially for a project of this size, we went through an RFP process. So part of that means that we're vetting, you know, a variety of different products, and they could be from different VARs as well. So really, we had to cover a lot of ground in order to be able to kind of prove, essentially moving forward with whatever cloud-based SIEM vendor that we wanted. And part of the concern was, as far as requirements go, leadership was. Well, let me back up for a second. So public universities, as you bring up, we do get a pretty huge workload push that comes around like class registration and things. So the data that's collected there is protected by FERPA, but also because we have Health Science Center campus and we also have student health services that are run on Norman campus, we have HIPAA data. We have a variety of different, I mean, we're a tier 1 research university. We do a lot of DoD, DOE contracts. So there's lots of meteorological, radar, basically classified research information that's also segregated to specific parts of campus. And so being able to meet the individual regulatory needs for each of those as well is kind of difficult to be able to do whenever basically you just have your SaaS offering and you're just like, okay, here's what we do. Because if you're running everything on-prem, then you can always just buy more hardware, buy more software. You can just keep kind of bloating this thing out until it fits whatever use case that you figure out.
Yeah, if you've got the money, sure.
Yeah, and then that's also kind of the flip side of things. A lot of the bids that we were getting through this process included things that we just didn't really need. At first, whenever we were starting to look at things, there was a question of, well, do we need like something of kind of a managed service provider in order to be able to handle SOC services as well, to be able to provide 24/7, 365, because that's required under certain regulatory requirements. And so there's a back and forth that happened with us and our GRC team in order to be able to determine via policy and kind of with they oftentimes act as our go-between with our Office of Legal Counsel as well. So essentially, a lot of the pushback was kind of coming from well, this is a big project and it's going to take a lot of resources, and we're potentially taking risk by putting all of this control information or essentially analysis based off of that control information outside of our environment. And so there's a little bit of...
Hold on. I'm sorry. I just want to clear that because I think that's an important point. Was it that the data wasn't living in your data center, or was it more that okay, I'm pretty sure the data's safe. It's just that could somebody else do something with that data that we don't know about? What was it that you guys were more concerned about? Because I think that's a fear that I don't think comes out enough in these cloud discussions.
Right. It's a little bit of both. Data classification is always kind of difficult because there's always a question of, so using HIPAA data as an example, the general guideline is you want to fully de-anonymize, or rather, you don't want to be able to de-anonymize medical data whenever it's presented in whatever format. So, I mean, this can even come down to things like calendar invites that might include, a patient name in like a specific OR room or something like that. But there is a difference between where like the data for calendar invites lives, and then essentially the log information that for us we use Office 365 or Microsoft 365 for Exchange. So our log information comes from Azure, but that log information doesn't necessarily include all of the pertinent information that might be able to de-anonymize that patient, but we need to verify and make sure of that. So that way we're not sending that information into a place that has lower security controls than what our regulatory compliance is. So that's kind of where the concern was for there. And I mean, ultimately, for places where the use case also changed a little bit over time so that we're not dealing with nearly as much HIPAA data anymore. There is a clinical hospital that is somewhat associated with OU, and they have since kind of spun out their own IT services and provide a lot of that. So we were able to mitigate our risk away from those regulatory requirements through essentially kind of other mechanisms. But the big concern was, okay, well, we do have protected data. How are we making sure that the protected data is staying within our protected data systems, and that, how are we making sure that this is something that is going to work for us? So, yeah, and for the most part, the vast majority of our log information is underneath a data classification that I would say, while it's not necessarily public information, it isn't going to be as damaging or as potentially harmful to the university if somebody is, say, getting our firewall traffic logs or something like that. It definitely could be useful for sure, but I would be hard pressed to see that would be able to be that could be used essentially as saying like a compliance violation or something like that.
So you got over the hump of storing the data up in Devo, right? First you had to, we had to convince Devo, had to convince you, and then everybody else. But so we got over that hump. You guys are okay. Our data is going to be safe up there. We're going to. And there's all kinds of stuff that Devo does around that I don't think we need to get into. I guess the next question is, once you got over that hump of, okay, our data is going to live, essentially in our domain in the Devo cloud instead of your domain on-prem. Everybody kind of gets over that fear. And then what was like a couple of the other big concerns that either you had or just other people on the team had about, hey, let's put the brakes on this. Maybe this isn't such a good idea. Even though we want to get rid of all these, 5 independently run log sources. We want to centralize everything. We want to get global search. We want to minimize the amount of infrastructure we got to manage. What were still some of the fears that people kind of raised their hand and said, hey, we need to think about this?
So additional concerns would be essentially the rate that it would take, basically the rate of onboarding other security analysts in order to be able to start utilizing that cloud-based SIEM for essentially our day-to-day activities, whether that be incident response, or we also have, we run firewall operations. We do a lot of email and cloud security. There's a lot of other functional responsibilities that flow through SecOps. So there's definitely the concern of, okay, well, we can buy a tool, but how long is it going to take before people are actually going to be able to use it? I'd mentioned previously that we had Elk or Graylog in the past. From a technical standpoint, Elasticsearch or really anything that's Lucene based, there's a variety of technologies that whenever they index and parse things and represent their data in kind of a human legible way, they do that at at the time of index. So basically, whenever their index is written to disk, your parsing schema is locked in place. And so that is basically how your data is represented. For platforms like Devo and others, y'all work in a way where it is called parse on query, where essentially the way that the data is represented, so the way the data is stored on the disk is generally going to be, that's going to stay the same. And then the way that data is represented to that end user is going to be based on the query that you put into it. And of course, there is ways to be able to enforce like an even parsing schema within that through like essentially query templating or, there's certain tagging systems and things kind of like what Devo does in order to be able to make sure that it's that a specific query is kind of being applied there. So just that difference in technical capability is enough to be able to shake a little bit of, how we were adding on new log sources or how we were updating how our parsers were working. Going through Elk and Graylog, we handled all data standardization and normalization across all of our log sources. So we pretty much had to come up with that ourselves. Elastic has their common schema and things. We based a little bit off of that. But again, that was kind of all of our own work. So another one of the advantages of kind of going with a SaaS offering is not only are you buying that service, but you're buying the team behind it too. So whenever it came to a lot of the concerns I feel like I had with, well, how long is it going to take to utilize this, were alleviated whenever it came to moving through the deployment process and continuing to work with professional services and customer success. it definitely, I mean, there's a learning curve for sure behind it. Every single time that we add a new person onto our team, I feel like I shoulder surf them for probably about a month, just to make sure that they're getting everything right. But yeah, I mean, especially in hindsight and things like that, that discomfort in the meantime, uh, it was worth it. Um, I also will say another advantage that we had was we got to run our legacy system and our cloud SIEM concurrently. So that way we weren't really missing out on capabilities.
That's nice. So you got to run them concurrently and gradually move from the legacy to the next gen sim instead of having to do a cutover on day one. Yeah, that's a luxury that not everybody gets.
And sure. It's something where because for me, I like to be able to verify a lot of the figures that we're seeing and things like that. So whenever it comes to getting summary statistics out of a platform, I like to be able to verify that through external sources. So at first I was concerned where I was like, we're going to be sending a lot of logs to a relay or to a cloud source. So so how do I know that they're getting all of the logs that we're sending? And how do I know that, you know, whenever it gets to the relay, that it's actually making it up to there, and how, and you know, how are we making sure that we're parsing everything? And at least Devo kind of had a couple of different ways of doing it, where definitely there's the monitoring packages that kind of come in there, and that oftentimes it's kind of a nice double edition if you're setting up your own relay as well. But then also, yeah, being able to have that side-by-side comparison allowed us to basically be able to say, okay, well, I'm running this investigation here. What would that look like in our new system as well? And so, yeah, yes, you're kind of doubling up work, kind of, but it is a way that you're not essentially doing that in a live pressure situation where there is potential business impact for any kind of delay.
I think everybody would prefer the concurrent to run them both, right, before I commit fully. But some people, due to cost, right, they don't always get that luxury. I've known many customers where we've had to complete, you know, the project by the time, you know, their license was up for their legacy tool. So sometimes that's just the nature of the beast. You said something that I wanted to circle back on, because I think it's important that a lot of people don't understand about Devo unless you've been bitten by it before. And that is, if your data source changes at all and your parser doesn't reflect that change, you're just going to drop that data on the floor, because your parser is going to fail. So, you know, if you use an old parser, like you update a operating system or version or something, now all of a sudden there's a new data field. Like, you know, I always go back to the NetFlow, because I think I'm an old networking guy. I think of it in terms of NetFlow. Like when you went from NetFlow 5 to NetFlow v9, there's a bunch of new fields. So you if you try to use that like a NetFlow v5 parser, you just get gibberish. So that breaks a lot of ingestion. So if you've had to maintain the solution, right? You go to do an incident, you go to search, and all of a sudden you've got no data for a particular log source, and you realize that something has changed and your parser's broken and none of that data's made it in. You got to go change your parser. And so Devo doesn't work that way, because, as you mentioned, we tag the data and we don't parse the data on ingest. We parse it at query. So you're not really changing the data ever, right? You're never putting it in a typical table. What you're looking at in Devo is the view of the data, right? It's like a tabular view of the data, and that parser is rendered for that particular query. So your raw data is always there. You never have to do it. And that's a headache that I think a lot of people have faced and don't understand that, you know, different way to do that. You don't have to worry about that anymore. What were some of the other, besides like worrying about the parsers and making sure that the data actually looked the way in your new sim that it did in your old sim and you could, you know, work with it before, what were some of the other things that you didn't anticipate, I guess, that were a challenge, or if you had it to look back on, you've been like, oh, I wish I would have done that a little differently. If I had known now, if I knew then what I know now, I would have done this.
Sure. So definitely one of the things that we changed after the first year was an idea of essentially the primary utilization for that cloud-based SIEM, as well as what our goal for retention was. So originally, the cloud-based SIEM was my intent to be able to provide a holistic view of kind of our mission-critical logs, and we'd be able to do cross-campus searches, and we'd be able to perform advanced analytics on that. So we'd be able to get some like UEBA or some anomaly-based alerting, something like that. And basically, we're just going to have this nice, small, contained area where we get the really advanced analytics, and it would really just be able to keep data hot for about 30 days. And one of the things that we realized as we continued to utilize it more was that hot searchable storage is very valuable, even whenever it comes to, I would say, interaction. Most of the time, whenever we do, I suppose, like an instant response that involves an interaction with a third party, a lot of that is going to be based on historical data. And if we're trying to be able to size everything and keep things on-prem and hot searchable storage, so you're doing, potentially expensive SSDs, you're going for your NVMe SSDs, so you're getting your real fast read and write times. That price really adds up quickly to be able to do, especially at scale. So essentially what ended up happening was we were planning on just using the cloud-based SIEM as our, this is where we're going to do our like immediate instant response. It's where we're going to get our advanced analytics. And then the rest of our definition-based alerts and all of our other log sources that were already going into our on-prem gray log, that's going to continue happening. And what ended up happening is that kind of flipped, where we're not doing advanced analytics on Graylog, but essentially we are having to rethink how we're doing our on-prem, because we have realized that the cloud-based SIEM works really well for more technical, like security analysts or data scientists, things like that. But whenever it came to producing reporting and things like that for C-level executives, or providing visibility for application administrators that maybe are a part of not central IT, but like distributed IT, essentially, we realized that we really like the nice tool. And then trying to train a bunch of other folks on that really nice tool just so that they would be able to continue viewing what they're expecting to see was a little bit much of an ask. And so kind of as a result, we came down to, okay, well, we like the really nice thing, and we're going to keep using that really nice thing. And we want to allow other folks to be able to use also a nice thing, but kind of direct that more towards their use case. So we're essentially trying to redo centralized log management from an ITSM perspective now.
Interesting.
Versus its previous perspective of being born out of SecOps. Yeah, so that's kind of like,
I think the good news there is that you've got the data, right? You've got it's good to have the data. You've solved the first problem, and now other parts of the business are hungry to utilize that data. I think that's great. It'd be especially great if they could start kicking in some budget for that.
Well, yeah, and that's come up in discussion. So one of the things that has happened recently, so for us as a public university, the way that our board of regents, which is kind of like our governing council or your executive, well, not quite executive board, more like shareholders board. But yeah, so our board of regents, their umbrella stretches over technically 5 campuses. The 2 that I hadn't mentioned are Rogers State and Cameron University, which are 2 public state universities that are here in Oklahoma. Recently, there's been an agreement between the University of Oklahoma and Rogers State to be able to provide security services for them. Essentially, kind of as a result, we're having this new set of log sources that are coming in. And we're going through the process of basically trying to bring them at parity for what log sources that we currently have and the formats that we currently have them in, and then being able to see how to be able to get comparable log sources based off of their technology stack. I wouldn't necessarily say that we're acting like an MSSP, but kind of that perspective of that changing perspective, that changing definition of like who we are and what services that we provide for people. That's definitely being able to kind of plan in and know now what centralization would look like would have been a little bit more beneficial. Luckily for us, because we manage all of the data, like I said, like we're spoiled. And so whenever it comes to being able to shift things around to be able to fit kind of this new realization of what our priorities are, for us, that wasn't such a big deal. But then whenever it comes to building out the new on-prem service, that is going to be a little bit more difficult. But it's a journey. I mean, we'll be able to get there.
Yeah. Well, you guys made a tremendous strides. Speaking of that, how long was the migration? I guess maybe not start to finish, like soup to nuts, all said and done, but from the time you kind of started the new stuff to where you kind of had them both running, and you could kind of be like, okay, like I can start testing this thing against my old one and making sure that it's got what I need. How long before you got there?
So I would say we were for our log sources, about, I think it was like 90% of our log sources. It was like 90 or 95%. A very high percentage were already there were already parsers that were available. So that was
used out of the box stuff from Devo. Didn't have to create any net new stuff.
For the vast majority of things, yeah. And that's honestly just because our technology stack is pretty common. I mean, we got our Palos, we have Cisco, we got Microsoft. It is about as bog standard as you can get, which is nice. And then the other 5 to 10% of logs that didn't already have parsers, to be able to get those up and running, we were able to get them in a utilized state through like the MyApp tables and kind of through our own queries and things. But then engagements with professional services allowed it to actually, be included in union tables by default, and things like that. So like to be able to get to that 100% parsed, it took a couple of months, but I think that was more of just us also trying to focus on, okay, well, let's get into training. We also needed to set up the SecOps application. So there's additional setup that needs to happen there, and providing and filling out information for those union tables that are called in, or not union, but lookup tables. So essentially, in order to be able to get Devo Core set up, that was fast. Probably a couple of weeks to a month. And during that time, I was also, running queries, getting active in the data search view. I was in the education platform. And so I was familiarizing myself, and I felt fairly confident in my skills and being able to navigate around after that month. And
so
then
about a month to get, a majority of, like, let's say, the lion's share of the important data sources in there, and you were actively working in there in about the first month. And refresh my memory, I think that was before we had Devo Connect, right? We didn't have Devo Connect at that point, did we? or did we?
I
I don't think we
know
had the community
it was,
when you first when you first started this journey.
no, there was the education site,
Yeah, the training.
and then I had Lori and and I, man, there was a whirlwind of folks uh, that we were talking to, but it was Lori and Woody for the most part that were really
That's right.
sitting down with me for that month and
So,
making
so
sure that
think
everything
how
was
much easier it would be now, James, for all these people who can like go onto the Connect and like, you know, ask a question and have people answer. And, you know, we didn't have any of that stuff when you joined. So a much better grassroots kind of community support system.
Yes.
Although, you know, our customer support and our tech services, you know, they've always done a great job.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, is there anything, you know, for somebody who's out there thinking about making the move and they're just like, oh, you know, it's going to be so painful, so much work. What would be some things that you would advise for them to do or think about?
So, the main thing whenever it comes to a SIEM project is you really got to split it into two separate things. You need to figure out how you're getting all of your log sources together. Um, and really, that's where I feel like the university has gotten a lot of flexibility whenever it comes to migrating between platforms. Is we have kind of split it into two separate problems where we have our kind of our log aggregation and archival storage. That's one half, and then the other half is our tools and analysis and where we're shipping everything. So by kind of splitting it into those two separate projects, that is kind of how you're able to, because essentially once you have everything aggregated into that single place, it is trivial to be able to split off a new feed and be able to provide templating and rewrites and kind of whatever you want. Language that I'm using is because we use syslog ng. We use the OSE version. I think 3.19 is what we're currently on. They have newer stuff, but anyways. But yeah, so syslog ng is kind of what we're using for our primary log aggregation and archival storage. There's plugins where it can basically take anything, and there's plugins where you can ship it anywhere, and there's lots of manipulation that goes into that, and it's all free. Well, it's the cost of hardware, so that's nice. On the other end of that, we have Homebrew Go-based TCP load balancer. That's just because we tried things out with Nginx and other kind of load balancers, and this is generally what we wanted. You know, I know a lot of log sources might utilize UDP or things like that. We liked the kind of assurance that came with the statefulness for TCP. So that was one kind of advantage. Being able to just kind of generally see what works for you with what works for your environment, especially whenever it comes to that aggregation side of things. That's the key, because as soon as you have it down in archival storage, then you can replay that information as many times as you want. And at that point, it's just kind of the cost of time and networking.
Yeah, I see a lot of customers moving towards third-party solutions like Cribble for this, just because it's easier than doing the plumbing yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like you know, number one, you have a knack and an affinity for that kind of plumbing on the IT side, but then on the other side, I think that you're also someone who likes the control. You like the control that comes along with that.
Yeah.
And like any good sysadmin or IT guy, you know, you like to be able to pull up a dashboard and, you know, look at it and check the health and make sure it's running all right. I think some people out there, particularly very large, you know, more decentralized globally enterprises, it's just too much, and they'd rather just have a third-party solution like Cribble and just be like, you know what, you guys deal with that piece of it, and then I'm just going to focus on the analytics piece over here once it comes in.
Yeah, I think especially another big pain point was, so again, part of my bias, my position on the team was in large part created because of that need for somebody who could sit in there and work on that infrastructure side of things. but there is that kind of, especially in today where, I've kind of seen the report of a kind of a linearly increasing population of security analysts, but then whenever it comes to actually positions being available, whenever it comes to the intermediate and senior level as well, that's increasing exponentially. And so a lot of people are, I had to kind of come to terms where it's like, yeah, I know what I really love to do within that sphere and things like that. But I also understand where that can be really time consuming. And then it's stressful whenever you're trying to deal with that and also perform your instant response at the same time. So
yeah, exactly. And if you've got to train somebody, right, and you've only got a limited amount of your own time and their time, right, to get productive, you can't train them on instant response, right, and threat hunting, and train them on, okay, well, here's how you make sure this parser works, or hold on, we gotta work on this parser to get a few more. It's I think, given how pressed for resources, I just think it's inevitable that you have to focus on the former, right, and not the latter.
Yeah, you really, I would say that in a perfect world, you shouldn't have to worry about the difference between block and object storage and having to explain that in a decision whenever it comes to, just being able to utilize, a data search within your SIEM platform.
Yeah, you gotta leave that to your SaaS back end, right? And then you got to focus on finding the nuggets and all that security data that are actionable. You got to find the actionable data, right? That you need to do something about.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. I know, guys, I can't believe we're almost out of time already. I only saw a few questions come in. I know that we were kind of answering questions as they came through. One was the SIM that you were previously using. I think we got to that one. The other, we talked about how long was the migration. I think we got to that one. Well, are there any other questions out there from the attendees that James and I didn't get to?
Yeah, I do see one here, Adam. It just asks how is the support Devo from the Devo side during migration? James, if you wanted to speak to that, I know you've touched on it a little as well.
Yeah, so professional services was fantastic. As far as I really felt like I had a lot of access to the back end, which for a SaaS service is weird because normally it's just kind of, you get what you get. But whenever it came to, feature requests, explanations for, the health of our environment and really getting down to the nitty gritty, I like that they actually wanted to explain that to me and didn't just want to sell something else. So yeah, even whenever there was, I had some confusion about some of the terms of our license and things like that, and the way that was kind of presented to me was really beneficial, and it actually helped us whenever it came around to, because I like to kind of stay outside of that business realm, but I also understand where getting into project management, I'm going to have to be in there anyways. So,
Awesome.
So yeah, it's definitely, it was really nice being able to work with Woody, and then also now, today, Lori and I, every single time that we talk, it's very productive conversation. And then also because everybody's always available, kind of either via email or Devo Connect, I feel like there are less things to talk about in those meetings because my communication is just immersed throughout the week, which is really nice because if I don't write everything down, sometimes I forget. And so this way I don't have to potentially forget. I could just jump on Devo Connect and search it real quick, or I can, ask it, and Juan will be able to pick it up almost immediately. He's super fast at that. So yeah.
Juan is great. He's great. For those on the call don't know, Juan manages Devo Connect, the community, and he's killer. In fact, I'm starting to get a lot of juicy nuggets from Juan, like his LinkQ Bible. Have you seen his LinkQ spreadsheet Bible?
No,
you got to get that. It's super cool. It's got drop downs. You can filter on operators, classifiers. It's awesome. It's awesome.
Can you please send that to me?
Yes, I will. I will, because I saw it from Juan the other day. I'm like, oh, that's gold. I got to get that. Yeah, I'll send that off to you. Okay, so this is great. Thank you so much, James. I think it's really important for people to hear from other people who have actually done stuff in the field for real, and not just from marketing people or the vendor per se. So thank you so much for sharing your real world stories of migration. And I hope that you agree that it was worth it. Just like my wife and I, the move from Nashville to Knoxville was painful, but we love Knoxville. We love Nashville too. It's just we're ready for a change. We love it now that we're in our old house, our new house. But my wife said that she would rather burn all of our furniture than move it again.
Yeah, yeah. The main thing for me is just I work in a very dynamic environment. InfoSec is never going to sit still for a second. So it's really nice to have tools that are as dynamic as you are. So, I mean, that's kind of the primary benefit for me. Regardless of what happens today or tomorrow, I'm going to have to figure out a way to be able to do my job. So.
Yeah, it's worth it. It can be a little painful, but it's always worth it when you come out the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thanks, James, for joining us. Thank you so much, Shannon, for setting this up, and thanks to everyone for joining. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good one. Bye.